Order. It is Monday, December 2nd, 2013. We're here for the purpose of the Committee of the Whole. I'd ask Clerk Cyprian to please call the roll.
Alderman Gutenkopf.
Here.
Alderman Deuter.
Here.
Alderman Dunn.
Here.
Alderman Leader.
Here.
Alderman Palumsky.
Here.
Alderman Bram.
Here.
Alderman Hipskin.
Here.
Alderman York.
Here.
Alderman Levin.
Here.
Alderman Healy.
Here.
Alderman Honquist.
Here.
Alderman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderman Mulliner.
Here.
Alderman Wagner.
Here.
14 present.
14 present, 0 absent. We have a quorum. On to public comments. Same guidelines apply to public comments during our regular council meeting. Clerk Cyprian, has anybody signed in for public comments this evening?
Yes. Claude Pagaz, 566 West Gladys.
Mr. Pagash, you have 3 minutes. Please approach the microphone.
Claude Pagach, 566 West Gladys. Mr. Mulliner, you have utterly failed.
Claude, excuse me, as I was reminding the City Council of our rules and Committee of the Whole, our ordinances and Robert's Rules, our ordinances also ask that anybody address your comments to the presiding officer.
All right, Mayor, let's put it this way. One of your aldermen has made a tragic error. He explained to this council at one time that the city was sued because stop signs and yield signs were popping up in this town like confetti, and that everybody and his brother was asking for one, and because the city got into trouble, they went and took up the rules and regulations designed by the federal government on their use. And as of late, these signs are starting to throw up all over the place because somebody on this council or somebody in the neighborhood decides they would like a stop sign, a yield sign. The only thing they haven't asked for is a stop sign. And as far as rules, I've sat here for a number of years, sir, and you know I have. I don't know what rules this council goes by. You stated they have their own set of rules. And then we have Robert's rules. And then when this council really wants something, they have no rules because they suspend them. And it's a little difficult for 2 to take on 12. But that's what happens endlessly. And you're going to talk about Han. The only thing I won't want out of Han is this. I don't want to have anybody reaching into the public treasury for Han. If those guys want to develop it, let them buy the land and let's get out of it. But I know what's going to happen. You're going to sign another contract, like you just signed a contract with somebody that's been going on for 5 years, and you have no idea what they are going to be required to build. So how can you sign a contract with somebody and put in enough clauses to cover every possibility? And that's what you're going to do with this Han. And the public is going to get stuck with general obligation bonds, as I refer to them, as a credit card. Because I'm going to be winding up paying them until they throw dirt in my face for the next 30 years. I'd like to see Han develop, but I'm awful tired of hearing every argument that they want Elmhurst to be their partners in these sites. Let them build them themselves. They're going to make the profit, or they're going to lose their shirt. But I don't want to keep on reaching into the public treasury to back them up. I don't care who they are. And that's what I'm against. And if you're going to have a set of rules, eliminate suspension of rules, because that's what you do endlessly. And that's from somebody that sat through a lot of meetings. So go with Robert's Rules of Order. Go with your own rules. But don't just come back every time you want something and suspend the rules. Why don't you just eliminate that from your ability? But you don't do it.
Mr. Pagash, you're at your 3 minutes.
Yeah, I know it is. So you can listen to this Han thing, but if it starts costing me some more money, I'm really going to wreck this place.
Anyone else else signed in for public forum?
That is all.
Is there anyone in the audience at this time who do not have an opportunity to sign in on our sheet prior to the meeting? If so, please raise your hand. You'll have an opportunity to speak. Seeing none, we'll move on. Agenda item number 3, business before the committee. We've got 2 items. I'm going to set this up and ask the council their opinion. We've got 2 items before the committee this evening. Both are time sensitive, but one I would think is much more time sensitive than the other. We have Hahn Street, and the folks from Kane McKenna are here, or at least one of them. Mr. Rich Licky's here. And then we have circle back items. It was our hope, it was the council's hope, that we would be finished with our circle back items last meeting. But we are not, so we pushed it out to this meeting, which kind of puts us into a pinch at 8:35 at night. We got through 4 items, 4 circle back items last week in about, I'm going to say about 2 hours. We have six circle back items before us, so 50% more. What I'm going to recommend, and I'd be interested to hear the council's opinion, or I hope they'll support it. What I'm going to recommend is that we have Kane McKenna give their presentation. However, I'm proposing that we have another committee of the whole next Monday night. I'll call it a full-blown committee of the whole, that will allow us to discuss the Hahn Street information as completely as possible. My fear tonight is that if we start discussion of the Hahn Street, I wouldn't know where to cut it off. And we still got these 6 circle back items. So my recommendation to the City Council is that we allow Kane McKenna to present. We take the week to digest the information. Certainly any questions we have, we want to submit. We can send to city staff for additional questions, or you can hold them till next week's. I will remind the council that our budget has to be approved. An ordinance has to be on the 16th and be approved. So is the City Council okay with that? Alderman Hipskin, everyone okay with that? I'm getting the nods, okay. That's what we're going to do then. I appreciate the council's indulgence on that. City Manager Grabowski will set up a committee of the whole next week for, at this point, only Hahn Street discussion. And Mr. Rich Licky's here from Kane McKenna. Mr. Kopp, does it need any setup, or? Okay, Mr. Rich Licky, I think most people are familiar with Mr. Rich Licky. He helped us with the TIF, and now he's here to go over, help us digest some of the Hahn Street proposals. Mr. Rich Licky, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of the City Council. Good to see you again. Stand working? Okay. What we'd like to do, as the mayor said, is to give an overview, and I think I just want to point out what we're reviewing and what we haven't reviewed in terms of our work scope. As you know, this is an extensive proposal. There's numerous parameters that have been presented to the City Council in relation to not only design, but also zoning, layout, aesthetics as it relates to this project. That's not going to be our area of focus. Again, that's a different level of information that you have, and also to review with staff. Our approach was to look at some of the numbers as it related to what the project would be able to generate in terms of taxes. It is in your newly created York Street TIF District, North York Street TIF District. And there's also requests for some assistance as it relates to each of the 3 concepts. So what our review will focus on, based on the information provided by the developers, also based on follow-up information that we had requested from them and working through with staff, there were a number of follow-up meetings as well as discussions as it related to additional information that we had requested in order to put together our analysis. And I think you've got that analysis under a separate cover. It's somewhat extensive. What we're going to do now, based on what the mayor indicated, is try to give an overview and a little bit of our methodology as to how we approached it. There were basically two developers, but three proposals. The first, as it relates to Lincoln Properties, the basic development parameters included 216 apartment units, 299 residential parking spaces, 118 public and retail parking spaces, and 14,000 feet leasable in terms of retail space on the first floor. The project budget, as presented by Lincoln, which included the elements of construction as well as soft costs, was $48,691,000. That included a land bid to the city of Elmhurst for $2.5 million, and also a request for TIF assistance of $500,000. Their occupancy date was estimated to be October 2016. There were some other numbers as related to the assistance, which weren't direct, but are costs that were not included in their budget, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. Morningside had two concepts as it related to primarily density. First, the smaller concept was 4 stories, 139 apartment units, 210 residential parking spaces, 114 public / retail parking spaces, and a little over 12,000 feet of retail space. This budget was $41,178,000 in terms of the construction and soft costs. The land bid was zero in this case, and the TIF assistance included two components: a little over $3 million for some site preparation, some other infrastructure and utility costs, and $1.8 million and some changes that related to the reimbursement for parking spaces, the public parking spaces that were included in the project. Their occupancy estimate was July 2015, so a year earlier. And again, there were some costs when we went through the budget with the city staff that were not part of the budget, but were going to be included in a subsequent chart. The second concept was the larger in terms of density. 6 stories, had 207 apartment units, 310 residential parking spaces, same amount of public / retail spaces that were non-residential, and also the same amount of retail space as it related about a little over 12,000 feet. The project budget was larger, again, given density, and there was a land bid in this scenario of $1,075,000, and the TIF assistance was scaled back to $3,322,000 with also the same occupancy date in terms of July 2015. So these were like the building blocks as it related to each of these three proposals. We then took the information, given the characteristics of the projects, primarily, again, their number of units, the forecast rents, and expenses that were identified for each of the uses, both retail and residential, and looked at comparables as well as file materials in order to start to translate some of these project parameters that you've seen in terms of estimates of real estate taxes as well as sales taxes for each of the proposals. What we looked at in terms of the TIF, under state law, the city has to allocate up to 40% of the residential increment for potential, if there's new school kids, for per capita tuition cost reimbursement to the schools. That amount is only paid out as needed, but in order to be prudent, it's something that we felt we backed off of the numbers in the event that it is needed. In the event that it is not needed, if there's less school-age children within the project, that amount reverts back to the city for use in the TIF fund and for use for any other project funding. But to the extent the school-age children are created as a result of the project and reside there, that money then does have to go out to the schools on an annual basis. So again, that $9,354,000 is the estimate of the gross taxes, real estate taxes, net of that 40% school allocation, and the largest percentage of that, really almost 85%, is attributable to the residential component of the project. And what we did, to be fair, is we looked at some area comparables for the market values, and in terms of the way the assessor was valuing properties, and we used the same commonality for all of the proposals as it related to market comparables. Same with the sales tax revenues. Again, in the absence of any letters of intent or any firm leases for these uses, we basically looked at industry averages, again, given the kind of rents that were forecast for these projects and probable multi-tenant uses. We used, again, the same industry average as it related to sales per square foot. The land bid, again, as I mentioned, there was $2.5 million for Lincoln. In addition to that, there were also had the permit fees, which were going to be paid, which is received by the city. And those top three amounts were aggregated as, again, only looking at what this project generates, not other source from the city funds, but looking at what this project could generate as a result of its implementation, and then subtracted directly expenditures. And these expenditures included three different components. One had to do with the direct TIF request that the developer had put in the proposal. Secondly was the inclusion of the TIF 4 land, which was the most recent piece that had been acquired by the city. And then thirdly, there were some components that the developers did not include in their budget relating to the relocation of utilities, some lease buyouts, which would be direct costs of the project, but we did not see included in their budget. So you filter through or compare, and this is just, again, kind of a high-level comparison, looking at gross revenues, gross expenditures. This project had the potentially the highest net benefit as it related to the comparison of incremental taxes to what the estimated expenditures could be. We then looked at the two concepts as related to Morningside, and again, part of the differences there are directly related, especially on the real estate taxes, to density. The 4-story had less units, less real estate taxes paid. 4 and the 6-story did have the same amount of retail space, so you've got the same amount of potential sales taxes. There was a differential as it related to the land bid. The 4-story did not have a land bid, and the 6-story did. And the estimated expenditures, again, included the same three components that we identified for Lincoln. We took in the TIF request for each of those concepts. Again, the 4-story concept had a higher request because of the parking reimbursement. We looked at the land cost for the most recent acquisition within TIF 4. And then lastly, we factored in the fact that permit fees were not going to be paid, and there was also the lease buyout. Some of the costs that were similar to the Lincoln in terms of costs that were not included in the budget, but from the city's evaluation of the project would have to be incurred at some point if the project was going to be implemented. So again, as you can see, the estimated net benefit very marginal or smaller as it relates to the 4-story concept. Again, a primary driver in that is the higher amount of the TIF assistance for that project, and consequently, you also have some lower amounts of revenue because of less density. Whereas the Morningside 6-story concept improved the return to over $5.6 million. Again, and part of that had to do with there's less TIF assistance, and again, as you could see, higher TIF gross revenues from the higher density on the project. And again, similar to Lincoln, we backed out the 40% school allocation, which could or could not be used, but we thought it prudent to move it off the table in the event it is used. The schools have a first lien on those dollars. And all we've done here is just put them side by side. And again, from the standpoint of ways to evaluate this, not advocating this is the only way to do it. This is an approach that we've used in the past in terms of trying to summarize what the potential economic impacts could be for the municipality. Again, this is independent of any design or aesthetic considerations the city may have as it relates to the review of these proposals. But really is almost kind of a bare bones as it relates to looking at what are the potential revenues associated with these projects and compare them to some of the costs as we understand it that could be attributable to these projects.
Okay. Alderman Bram?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question on how you,
Alderman Bram, it was the will of the council that we were going to just submit our questions and discuss later.
okay, I thought we would have a few questions, but that's fine. We can wait.
I appreciate that. Yeah, Alderman Gutenkopf.
Will the representatives from Kane McKenna be at our next meeting?
As proposed, Mr. Rich Licky, I'm assuming you or Mr. Biondo? Okay, so Committee of the Whole for Han Street, for the purpose of Han Street discussion, next Monday night. In addition to the summary that Mr. Rich Licky gave us, also included in the information that was distributed this week, some aldermen did submit additional questions to city staff. City staff did get additional information and feedback from the finalists. I would encourage everyone to read that. In addition, any additional questions based on this or that you think of, direct to city staff, and they will go to the appropriate sources to get it, and we'll have a healthy discussion next Monday night. Thank you, Mr. Rich Licky.
Thank you, Mayor.
Where's my... okay. Review of, hopefully, review of our fiscal 2014 budget, circle back items. Mr. Grabowski?
I'll be taking my appropriate seat.
Very nice. Okay. You don't want to hang out? You don't have to hang out. Yeah, absolutely.
So isn't this fun? For a while. For a while.
Okay.
So they gave you a card if you want.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. You bailed me out a few times tonight already.
I don't think so. Wait here. Are the circle back?
You don't,
Yeah, no, Mr. Grabowski, you ready?
Yes.
Okay, if memory serves, agenda item, circle back number 5, page 19, consultant fees. We got up to that, and that's where we ended. 119, what did I say, 19? Page 119.
What's that?
This was a circle back by Alderman Gutenkopf. I believe it was in reference to Mr. Bartels, page 119.
Position.
Attachment G is what was provided. No, I'm sorry, attachment F. Where's my attachment? There it is. Mr. Grabowski, anything else you want to add before we dive in?
I do not have anything to add, only to answer Alderman Gutenkopf's questions.
Okay, Alderman Gutenkopf, city staff has provided attachment F, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So essentially, I pulled the 3 consultants and the new position, the visitor tourism that's getting restructured into the new marketing and communications position. And I'm looking for some broad sort of sense of the restructuring of all of these jobs. Perhaps Mr. Van Slyke's position is outside the scope of the overlap of what the new marketing and communications position will do. So please keep that in mind, because I'd like to really understand the overall goals of at least Mr. Bartels and the Feinzahl team in relation to the new marketing and communications position. We've had a referral from another alderman who was hoping that we could get a broad handle on this. And my sense is that since we're starting with Mr. Bartels with attachment F, that the number of hours that we've ascribed to the consultants hasn't changed. So I'm assuming that their duties have. Now that this new position has been approved, I'd really like to hear from you what the different duties are, why the number of hours hasn't changed, how you see this changing, and I'd also like to put us into the context of why we added these consultant positions in the first place. As I recall, when we were looking to cut full-time staffing from the budget, we added some consultants as a way to address some of the shortfall, some of the job duties that were no longer going to be addressed by full-time staff. So now that we're adding a full-time staff person back into the budget, I think it's really important for us to talk about what the consultants are doing, the positions that we added to pick up that slack. So I'm going to throw it out to you.
Okay, and happy to answer that. You're correct that there was a referral to the Development Planning and Zoning Committee regarding this, and that was discussed 2 months ago, Mike, or so, regarding the new position and where things are structured. And in fact, we brought it to them in anticipation of the budget for a report. When we first conceived the position, one of the first questions we asked was, how many hours is Mr. Bartels dedicating to this particular task in terms of just general communications from the city out to the residents? And what we found was, while we did have some hours budgeted, it wasn't as many as we thought might be for that particular third of his time. If you recall, Mr. Bartels' time is split with museum activities, with communication activities, and with economic development activities. And what we found was that I was using Mr. Bartels on occasion as we needed for press releases, but more so he was working on, I would call it, specialized communications. If you recall, he does the cable shows that we broadcast, and that's where we want to focus his efforts. And that's really where his efforts have been focused over the past year or two, on communications in that vein of the cable television, speaking strictly on communications. What we anticipate with this position is that communications in general will increase the number of hours. And as you had mentioned, we saw the opportunity with taking the visitors and tourism position and making that into the full-time position rather than trying to hire someone new strictly for communications. We thought there was the opportunity to bring that economic development sense of communications, visitors, and tourism together. Now that gets to the Fines-All group. What we realized when we were reviewing the referral was that we think we can better utilize Fines-All. I think what we've heard consistently as we've reviewed her contract, or the firm's contract, was that she's incredibly busy answering phone calls, emails, messages on locations in Elmhurst, and maybe that's not the best use of her time. So what we think we can do is to utilize the new position, the marketing aspect of that, for some of those tasks that Fines-All is doing now, and then better utilize Fines-All in the recruitment, retainment of businesses, retail businesses in town.
Follow-up, Alderman Gutenkopf.
Yes, thank you. So what you're telling me is that the intention with the budget is to keep the two consultants that are really under concern here, and hire on a full-time staff, because your experience, or the city's experience over the past 2 years, has been that really there's a lot more work than was anticipated, and this will increase the city's ability to address some of these issues. Is that what am I interpreting that correctly?
That's the exact message I'm trying to get across, yes.
And so whatever we'd been doing a couple of years ago when we let staff go, we really have a substantial amount more work now than we did then. and that we've discovered this through the use of these consultants who are able to do different things than the city staff had been doing? Would that be a fair assessment?
I would say over the last few years, as the economy has improved and people are looking to open businesses, that yes, on the economic development side, things have improved to the point where we need fines all to accomplish different tasks than maybe what they have been doing. And in addition, I feel, and this is just me, that we do need to improve communications out to the residents and to the business community, and particularly in emergency situations where this person, being a full-time staff person, will give us that flexibility.
I have more follow-ups. So this marketing communications position is really going to tackle two disparate but somewhat related tasks. They'll be answering phone calls and emails from people who are looking for information about locating their business in Elmhurst, and they will also be sort of the chief communications position for the city, who will be reaching out to residents and businesses and whoever the city needs to communicate with through press releases. They'll be handling the whatever electronic communication we're talking about, the social media communication, all of these things that seem to be sort of floating around. So,
Can I comment to that? Yes, my expectation is that this person will certainly come in with the communications portion of it and hit the ground running. With regard to the other aspect, the economic development portion, the retailers, I think that person's going to need to work with Fines All for a little bit to kind of get the lay of the land in Elmhurst, understand it, and be able to transition into that as we go.
Alderman Gutenkauf, another question?
thank you, Mr. Mayor, because clearly I'm having some reservations about how we've been, talking about some of these consultant positions all along, and it seems to morph considerably every time we add another layer to it. I know we've kind of got 3 separate circle backs that I pulled. I hope you don't mind if we sort of talk about them all under one umbrella. Would that be agreeable
If it means
to
for a
you?
more efficient meeting, I'm all for it.
Well, thank you, because if we're going to talk about them sort of all under one umbrella, because it seems like there's an awful lot of overlap here, I have always been concerned about how we define whether or not these tasks are being accomplished appropriately, they're meeting our needs, and that we have some structured mechanism for making sure that we're getting what we want out of this. And what I'm really leading up to is that, I've heard for the past several years about the Fines All team and their tasks, that they tend to be task-driven, that getting an evaluation of how effective they are has been very difficult. How do you see this changing now? How do you see us being able to take Mr. Bartels and focus him on the specialized communications, the marketing and communications position, being able to eventually take on some of their tasks, the way you're going to redirect them into new tasks? How do you see this as being restructured so that you can evaluate whether it's effective and that you'll be able to report back to the city council and say, yes, in fact, this has made a difference, here's how?
Strictly with regard to the Fines All group, as I said, we think that they can be better utilized, which came out of that referral to DPZ, I think, and there are other abilities, and I don't have the material from Development Planning and Zoning from the report in front of me. I can find it here, but there was just a lot of discussion there about events that they can plan, about communications, economic development, issues that they can address, that they have the skill to address, but they just don't have the time right now to do that. And so basically what we're doing is reprioritizing their time to what I would call more complicated tasks that they have the ability to address.
So, and I have one final question. So Given that, how did you come up with a number of hours to set in the budget for this coming year? How did you determine, since their job will change, all of them, since the kind of tasks you're asking them to do is going to change, how do we set budget for each of these tasks, or are we setting a number of hours and expecting them just to work up to a ceiling?
We've set a number of hours, a ceiling, and I think we've proven, well, I mean, it depends on which consultant and which priority. Sometimes they hit the ceiling, sometimes they don't. And so this is what we think is necessary to accomplish the tasks, the plan. You know, we adjust accordingly if we think that there's not enough hours, perhaps we'd come back. Generally, though, once we've established that ceiling, and that's certainly a budget priority as much as it is anything else, to set that ceiling and work under it.
Let me ask a question. City Manager Grabowski, I know Fines All specifically has a very short contract. Can you refresh the council's memory, the contract that Mr. Van Slyke and Mr. Bartels is under, when do those expire?
Our best recollection is that each of those have a year and a half left on them for Mr. Van Slyke
Van
and
Slyke
Mr.
and Bartels. Okay.
Yes.
Alderman Plumsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In going through this process last 2 years, I wondered at what point is there the opportunity to make a change in how they're structured and how consultants are paid and how much they are paid and how much we're allocating. And I think in the last year, we found the opportunity in committee to determine where the change may be and how we can handle that. And I think that I would expect to see some changes in the number of hours. We've already seen some steps with the creation of a new position. Some of these duties have been reallocated to fall underneath that new position. So I think we will see some change, and I think that it's difficult to sit here and in the seat that I look at these numbers from. I don't want to speak on the whole council, but as me not being a staff person, I know Mr. Grabowski has definite opinions on where all these positions may take off, but I think that we still have some committee work ahead of us on how these roles are going to be funded, how their roles may change, and I think that's still ahead of us. So I couldn't make any recommendations on how these numbers would change, but I do think that we'll be discussing in committee some potential changes. Thank you.
Okay, additional comment, Mr. Bram.
Thank you. Alderman Palumski's comments actually assisted me in regards to encouragement that this is still being worked. Up until those comments, I was not under that belief or assumption. At least I haven't heard it here at the dais in previous conversations. I don't want to refer to any of the consultants by name. I think it's appropriate to be referring to the roles, because I think, you know, consultants can come and go. I don't know if the current consultants are appropriate or doing the job that they're assigned to do. That is ultimately, I believe, up to the city manager to determine. But the roles is what's confusing me, and the correlating of hours to those roles. When we talked about this under the normal city council agenda of creating the new marketing and communications position, I had a tough time, and I think, voted against it because of the fact, I think it was Alderman Healy's comments. I was referring to his comments, not about Alderman Healy. I think Alderman Healy's comments were, I was in agreement with the ultimate destination. It's the path on how we're getting there. For instance, the public relations and development consultant role. If we are shrinking the responsibilities of that role, and I believe I heard City Manager, you just mentioned that, then why wouldn't the hours shrink as well? I understand they're a maximum, but why would we propose to keeping them the same, even just for this discussion in itself? On top of that, we're creating, or the proposal is to create an additional role, marketing communications position. Some of those tasks, as listed here, the material that was provided to us, the structure, the organizational chart, if you would, are currently done by the deputy city clerk today. Communications to the council and commissions and updating of the website and, you know, some of these things that are laid out here are done today, but we're saying we need a full role for that. So I think that's what Alderman Gutenkopf, I believe, not to speak for Alderman Gutenkopf's comments, but is going along the same path. If these things have changed, why are all the three positions that are filled by, the three roles that are currently filled by consultants today, why are those hours remaining the same on top of adding a new position, on top of a couple of years ago not having an assistant city manager? I mean, the reason why we did these consultant positions was to reduce the impact to the city from a benefits perspective. And now we're kind of taking the reverse course, adding a position, or the proposal is to add a position that would include benefits and keeping the same roles that we had for the last few years, and some of them even reducing to some degree. So I just haven't heard the justification on why would we shrink the roles in regards to responsibilities but keep the hours the same. And that would make me feel better and sleep better at night if I heard that when, like I said, a lot of these, the proposed marketing communications position is handled by, some of them, deputy city clerk. The public relations and development consultant role, city manager, you stated yourself that the communication part would be reduced for that role, but does that mean we're having more TV shows to make up the time difference? A little bit of jest there. And then for economic development consultant, I don't see the need for all four of these proposed roles at the same hours. That's the clarification I need.
Okay, so if I can summarize, if I may. You have the hours in. It appears that the hours you have in are the same that were in last year. And I assume are ones that are stated in the current contracts. Why have you not proposed to change them in this budget?
The hours that are reflected now were reduced when the contract was approved a year and a half ago, and they were basically cut in half on the communication side. So we did reduce that, understanding that Mr. Bartels, we weren't utilizing him as much as we thought we might, so we did reduce those hours by about 50%. With regard to the full-time, if I may, we are trying to strike that balance with every position that comes open, whether it's in our best interest to contract that out, to perhaps split it into part-time roles, to bring in an agency, something like that. In this particular instance, we felt it best to have one full-time position on staff, and the main reason is so that they're available, and we would hire this person with the understanding they're available when we need them, not just 8 to 5 or regular business hours. It's they are available when we need them. When we reduced just the economic development department, and this is before my time, I believe we released 4 employees at that time. And one of the reasons was budget cuts and the benefit side of it. So I see this, and really, I mean, you're adding a half a position, making a part-time into a full-time. Granted, we are adding the benefits aspect of it, but we're adding a half a position, not to replace the 4 that we had let go, but with that and the other efforts that we have with the consultants, with the assistant manager, I believe we're still running a very efficient department and division because they're not just focused solely on economic development. It's a very broad spectrum that those employees and consultants are addressing.
Alderman Healy, and then
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And City Manager Grabowski touched on a couple of the comments I wanted to make. And I was going to start with the historical perspective. And I'm fairly certain most of us, or at least those of us who were around when we had to make those tough budget decisions 4.5 years ago, economic development was at, I don't want to say an all-time low, but it was certainly very low. Budget constraints caused us to eliminate positions. It was a tough time. City staff came back and said, you know, we're kind of creaking here. We need a little help. The decision was made to bring consultants on for all the benefits and salary reasons, et cetera. I don't think any of us would question that today the level of economic development and economic development activity that's going on in the city is a lot greater than it was 4 years ago. Whether it's the North York TIF, Hahn Street, Addison Street, various just developments across the city, the level of economic development work going on is greater. As far as a full-time position goes, and I spoke to this, and Alderman Bram referenced them, the comments, I have a greater expectation, and I know the city staff does, and I know many of us on the dais do, we have a greater expectation of our city's ability to communicate directly to our residents, especially today with all the changing technology and what have you. I view that full-time position mainly as addressing those needs. Yes, there are economic development benefits that position can provide in helping marketing the city, but it's an added service. It's that position is going to address what I view as a deficiency today. So when you look at the total amount of work, whether it's communication to our residents or economic development, it's just gone up. And, you know, I trust city management to control the consultants' time. I know that in talks with Alderman Polumsky and Alderman York, who have a referral in about many of these subjects, I've had lengthy conversations with them. I know the right committees are watching these. These are good questions to ask about what and how and where. I'm comfortable, I know the answers to them. I'm comfortable that the proper oversight exists, and I'm comfortable that staff will manage consultants' hours accordingly, given this council's expectations of staff, balanced with all of the work that we know needs to be done. Thank you.
any additional comments? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Since we're sort of lumping all of this together, one of the circle back items relates to the visitor and tourism position. Do you mind if we talk about that? This is attachment G. What I'd like to understand, now that the full-time position has been approved and the visitor and tourism position is still appearing in our budget, how does this affect the budget document overall? Is this going to be eliminated? Have we accounted for the salary and benefits of the full-time position in the budget? What changes?
The schedule, attachment G, reduces the budget for that part-time person from 12 months down to 4 months. At that point, the individual who's occupying that position has an intention to retire. So what you see on the second column from the right, City Council adjustment, is reducing the proposed budget from 12 months down to the 4 months activity. And of course, then we also reduce the related employee benefits to go along with that. So this budget for this department, visitor and tourism, would be decreased by almost $23,000 due to that decrease in the person that we know for a fact will be retiring.
And then the full-time position, is that already accounted for completely in the new budget?
The full-time position is accounted for in the proposed new budget. 70% is in the administration budget and 30% is in the municipal utility fund. And that's very similar to like city manager's salary, assistant city manager, myself. are all split because they're services throughout the city.
So,
Gutenkopf.
follow up. So when we approve the budget, we'll in fact be approving this attachment in the final budget document. Is that
The final, yes, the final budget document, you will get with the final ordinance a separate memo that will show all the adjustments, all the carryovers, things that we are going to finish in this year, but we're not going to pay for till next year, or money that's been approved in this year that we're just not going to get to that project until next year, and any other adjustments that are made by the council through this process. So you will see this as part of those council adjustments.
Yes, Alderman Gutenkopf.
I have another question. Some of the consultants' contracts ended at the end of our current fiscal year. Do we have plans, or is this something that the committee has begun to address, to send out new requests for proposals for other consultants? And if we're not planning to send out requests for proposals for those services, since the positions have changed, why not?
Let me give an attempt at that. Two of the consultants are under contract for another year and a half, and I think the caps in their contracts are reflected. That's what we see here. Certainly, at any given time, our contracts have an out clause. If we find halfway through we don't need them or we want to do something, city council or city staff can take action. I happened to be at the finance committee meeting when and obviously the council voted on the marketing or the fines all one. That one does expire at the end of this year, I believe. And I think it's going to be staff recommendation and discussion at the committee as to whether or not it's a renewal of fines all or whether it's an RFP or what have you. But I believe that's what the committee's going to be taking a look at. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
So
The actual dollars in the budget, even though they're just generic for
I would say that-
consulting for those services, and at this point, since the contract ends, it gives us an opportunity to reassess the skill set and to make sure that we have the right people doing those positions,
Yes.
doing those skills.
I think that's a fair statement. Obviously, a lot of the budget are place markers. When it comes to salaries and benefits, we can get down to the penny. On some other stuff that we know that council will be reviewing, that's a good place, a placeholder. As it relates to these consultants, we're very familiar that committee's going to vet it, and especially when a new contract comes up, and that's what's going to happen on this one.
Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Bram.
Thank you. In reference to the economic development consultant and the related tasks assigned or at least believed to be appropriate for this role, it's one of the tasks is coaching merchants on marketing. I've raised this in discussions actually in committee in previous months. Do we see this to be an increased role? I know the consultant themselves said that they currently attempt to do this today. Do we see this being a 50% role in this, 50% task of this role, or what is the role that? What is the percentage for this particular task for an economic development consultant?
I don't know that we can put an exact number on it as far as percentage of time spent. I think that's a case-by-case basis as the consultant goes to visits with the retailers to see what their needs are. Perhaps in one case, it's more website help that they need, or in another case, it is more marketing. So we've never really put a percentage on that. It's just a list of the skill set and expectations of what they can bring to the business community from the city.
The reason why I asked that question is because I was surprised when the consultant made mention of it, that was something that was being attempted back in the committee discussion. And I'm surprised that we as a city feel that is an appropriate use of city taxpayer dollars to be coaching merchants on how to build their website or how to improve their website or how to improve their marketing. I wouldn't consider that personally as an economic development consultant's role. Economic development to me is for the greater good of all of the city of Elmhurst, not to be spending hours helping individual businesses on, are they using the right font on their website to attract consumers. So I'm a little bit confused, and that's why I asked, is this a small percentage or a larger percentage? Because in the committee discussion, the consultant that we currently have for this role seemed adamant that it was not only appropriate, but they invested a decent amount of time doing that and would like to increase the amount of time that they help individual businesses for this marketing effort. Again, I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that, because I think we should be utilizing this role to develop all of the city of Elmhurst, not assisting individual businesses.
I'm going to ask Alderman Mulliner, who's a member of the the DP&Z committee, who is the one who most closely or most recently reviewed the fines all contract, to add to the conversation.
My response to this is pretty simple. I mean, a couple of things. One is, number one, we're going to be reviewing this contract and what the skill sets are going to be very shortly again. Another thing is that we have to keep in mind that one of our responsibilities is to help with the economic development of the community as a whole, and we want businesses to succeed in the community, so anything that we can do to assist that is what we should be doing. But as I said in the beginning, I think one of the things that we're going to be doing as we look at this is looking at that skill set to make sure that we've got the skill set the city manager feels is appropriate to meet those goals for the city of Elmhurst, and one of those is making sure that businesses survive. If we've got businesses in the community, we have to make sure that we can keep them going as long as possible. But our responsibility as a committee is to review those skill sets before it goes forward.
Okay. Any additional comments or questions? Alderman Gutenkopf.
In the budget on page 130, under Planning, Zoning, and Economic Development, line 3052 is for professional services.
I'm sorry, could you,
I'm sorry, line 3052 is
3052, okay.
yeah. It's for professional services, and it's $50,000, and I thought that was one of these three consultants, but on the spreadsheet breakdown, it's not. Could you remind me what that was for again?
The 50,000 is made up of two pieces. 25,000 for professional services that may include TIF analysis, market analysis, additional services relating to the North York plan, and 25,000 for overall marketing of the community, which may be, things like in the past, the last 2 or 3 years, it's been the Got It campaign. May or may not be that this coming up year, but perhaps another type of advertising campaign. Or email campaign, or we've talked somewhat, perhaps internally in staff, of a rebranding of the city. That all sort of goes hand in hand with somewhat with the new communications position. City manager.
So it's not necessarily to pay the consultants to do it. This is to support some of this, or to hire somebody else who might come in with a specialty analysis. Okay. That clears it up for me.
Okay.
All right.
Is the council satisfied with answers from city staff regarding the last two circle back items on the first page, page 119 and page 168? I know we've asked for clarification. I don't think anyone's asking for an adjustment at this point. Is that a fair assessment? Seeing some nods. Okay. Let's move on to page 126. Second page of circle backs. Employee relations. Since Alderman Bram requested this be pulled, City Manager Grabowski, why don't you let us know what we're looking at here?
As described on page 2, this particular item that Alderman Bram asked about includes 3 main areas. That'd be service awards for employee milestone anniversaries, employee events and programs, retirements, appreciation events, and then flower arrangements for funerals, births, significant hospitalizations, anything like that, where we can let employees know that we appreciate how much they give to the city.
Okay, so this is directly referring to the line item 6023 on page 126. Our short 8-month budget had it at 16,000, we're projecting 25,000. Any additional comments? Alderman Bram.
Thank you. Yeah, the reason why I pulled this was because it was budgeted for 25,000, and it didn't seem, at least from the years that were in our budget document, that we ever came close to spending 25,000. I'm not making a recommendation to reduce this. I mean, in all honesty, in the grand scheme of things, it's in the noise. But I am shocked to see, and I know we haven't done it in relatively past few years due to our budget issues, pretty much the employee appreciation dinner that we used to do at the end of every year, and I didn't see that in this list. Is there any thought on starting that up again, or are we doing enough? Because I do understand, being in management, of how important appreciation and recognition events or items or even lunches, et cetera, are, that's a direction that we're going to go back to, or are we doing enough on what is listed here today?
I think
Are we
that-
bringing the party back, and what else can you add to the 25,000?
I think that's something that we can consider as we move along. We did not take it under consideration for this year, but certainly as things improve, that's something that I agree with you. The appreciation of the employees is important, and it's something we can look at as we move forward, or other events.
Thank you.
Alderman Healy.
A question on a related subject. Doesn't the local business community still do something for our folks around Christmas time? I thought the Spring Road Business District did something in conjunction with maybe City Center. Does that still go on? I know it went on at one point.
They do it, I think, specifically for the Public Works Department.
Is it just
for-
Public Works, or
Yeah,
is it
for
the
their
whole?
help in putting the decorations up that
And there's
they-
a lunch provided and some other things that they do?
Yes.
That's not city funded, but the business community kicks in for that. Specifically, I think it's just Spring Road, but maybe it's some others.
City Center does as well. It's a partnership, and the
It's
Chamber as well.
Chamber.
Sorry, Jim. December 18th. And I would add that, I mean, we get appreciation from the residents all the time, and that is very welcome. We appreciate that. You know, somebody will drop off a plate of cookies or something like that, and so it's not just the business associations, it's the residents as well that do appreciate what the employees do day to day.
As do we.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other additional comments or questions as it relates to this circle back? Seeing none, City Manager Grabowski will move on to consultant fees, page 130. Not sure how far we
I
got.
think the next two items were addressed.
Is this
Yeah,
this is just the one that we wrapped up
Yeah.
all together? Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that was easy. And that 130, both of those. So we're on to 167. Last one, professional services, page 167. City Manager Grabowski, what are we looking at here?
This was a question that Alderman Bram had regarding actual expenditures, I believe, year to year, and so we put the schedule in there. If there's questions, we're happy to answer them.
Okay, 3052, professional services on page 167.
No further questions, Mr. Mayor.
No further questions. Okay. At this time, is there any other questions, comments, alterations, suggestions anybody has as it relates to our budget? Alderman York has a comment, question, or alteration.
Thank you, Your Honor. As I was looking through the budget, and everybody can turn to page 168, should be close, since the last page we talked about was 167. Something that came to my attention that I'd like to address is line item 6032, which is the community grant program. And it's in the budget at $94,000 this year and for 2015 as well. But as Alderman Healy alluded to earlier this evening, we had to make some, pretty drastic cuts in the 2009 time range. And one of them was in the community grants, and just so people can, if you're not aware, this comes up periodically, but the city supports entities such as the Elmhurst Art Museum, the Artists Guild, the Chamber of Commerce, the Choral Union, the Jaycees, the Symphony, the St. Patrick's Day Parade Committee. There's a number of different organizations that the city supports through this community grant program. And in 2008, 2009, we supported these groups to the tune of about $215,000 when you factor in what we gave them, and then there's insurance that the city's required to carry for these events as well, that it runs between $3,000 and $4,000 a year. So these are all very worthy organizations, and like all of us, they had to make some cuts and concessions and trim back, and some of them aren't around anymore, honestly, too, because of the recession and whatnot. But I believe that a lot of these groups are deserving of some additional consideration. We certainly trimmed them back pretty heavily in years past. And I would like to ask the City Council for consideration to take $40,000 out of our fund balance. We're still in the neighborhood of high $500,000, $600,000 fund balance contribution at the end of the year. I'd like to see us take $40,000 and put that back into the community grant program. So take the line item from $94,000 to $134,000 for this upcoming budget period.
Okay, let's handle that as a motion. Alderman York has a motion and a second by Alderman Hipskin to increase the line item on page 168, line item 6032. The motion is to increase the line item from $94,000 to $134,000. Any additional comments or questions? Alderman Healy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the proposed incremental $40,000, would that be earmarked to some of the organizations? Would it be proportional across all to increase all of the grants by whatever percentage the 40,000 represents? How did we come to the number 40,000, and where does that money go?
I can answer one part, and then I'll defer to Alderman York. I used to be on the Finance Committee, and they actually come to the Finance Committee and present. Everyone who Alderman York listed has the opportunity to present a proposal and actually come to the Finance Committee and present. And I would say that it's going to be up to the Finance Committee how they dole that out. I know specifically when we voted on stuff, and Alderman York's recollection is correct. We were at about 215,000, and we're below 100,000 now. It was, I don't want to say it was arbitrary, but each applicant makes their case, and some applicant might get 50% of what they asked for, and another applicant might get 70% of what they asked for. So it's a case-by-case basis on that sense. As it relates to the $40,000 number, I'll ask Alderman York, you can clarify that number.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I mean, I think it's just, we'll add it to the fund. I think there are some groups that have identified a clear need for rising costs, like related to insurance or of certain things. There are some people who've dropped off, like, for example, Art in the Park. Art in the Park draws an awful lot of people into town, and, you know, they would probably like to at least have consideration given again. There's a few other, you know, every year we see, you know, new events planned in the city. You know, one that I can think of is the bike race. You know, that's a new event that brought people in. That's an example. There are plenty of events out there that are worthy of consideration, and I think the committee will just take it, you know, we'll take a look at them on a case by case. We typically don't hear from everyone. We give everybody the opportunity, but generally we kind of listen to the bigger ones and see how their needs have changed and everything. But we're certainly open to you know, doling it out on a case by case type of basis and making a recommendation to the City Council.
Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last week I went into the city. I went downtown and I went to the Chicago Cultural Center. And there's a wonderful installation of a homegrown Elmhurst exhibit. The photography of Paul Natkin, Shudder to Think, was developed by our very own Elmhurst Historical Museum. It's installed at the Cultural Center, and it looks great there. It's a great space. And it reminded me that a couple of years ago, we dramatically slashed that department's budget. That we took $100,000 out of the Historical Museum's budget, and the bulk of the money that we slashed from the city budget came from the museum's exhibit and public programs. It's our department of the city, a department that does more than almost any other department to bring arts and culture to our residents, to bring Elmhurst out into the world, to let people know that we're here and that there's an awful lot of vibrant activity going on in this city. While I appreciate that there are other organizations in town that provide arts and culture and opportunities to draw residents into the city, I would be remiss if I didn't say that if we really think it's important to add $40,000 back into the budget, that the first place we should look, the very first place we should look, is at our own department that we dramatically slashed, a department that can do wonderful things like this. Everybody should have one of the museum's new calendars in front of them on the dais. And so while I'm going to be the first person on the dais to say I think arts and culture are strong community builders and things that we need, I would be hard-pressed to support expanding the community grant program before we put the money back into the budget to support our very own department and to put that money into the Historical Museum. So I think it's a great idea. I also think that it's a kind of last minute, and I think we have a higher priority, a much higher priority, and that's that we should put this money someplace else.
Alderman Brim.
Thank you. I applaud Alderman York for the proposal, but I as well have a difficult time supporting this, especially at this time. Last week I spoke passionately about a 4x3 pothole that is still patched with cold patch, but the full city council did not feel we had funds to improve what I would consider a safety issue. After that vote, we had funds for new sidewalks. We have funds for an underpass, or at least to budget them. And now we're contemplating having funds for additional community grants. There is some benefit to the community grants, and I agree with Alderman York's statements where, it does bring people to the community in some cases. Maybe there's anecdotal evidence that those people then stay and spend monies on food or entertainment, et cetera, and that would be worthwhile. But I don't believe in the concept, especially the night that we improved a tax rate levy increase, of because we have it, let's spend it. And I'm afraid that's a slippery slope that these last couple of weeks we seem to go down when I don't believe the community grant line item is a priority A or B, maybe not even a priority C or D item, but we're considering that over a priority A item increase. I think that in the upcoming fiscal year, if Alderman York or other colleagues would like to prove their case and make a referral to the committee and therefore the council to vet that, I think that would be appropriate to reconsider at the next fiscal cycle, the next budget cycle discussion. But at this point in time, the last day of circlebacks, albeit a good suggestion, I don't think it's appropriate to increase a line item that I don't know if we really even debated when we were talking about the budget in previous weeks / months. So I at least cannot support this item at this point in time.
Okay, any additional comments or questions as it relates to the motion before us? Okay, I'd ask Clerk Cyprian to call the roll on the motion to change line item, let me get this right, 6032 on page 168 from the listed $94,000, change that to $134,000, an increase of $40,000, and add that into the budget for 2 weeks.
Alderman York,
Aye.
Alderman Hipskin,
Aye.
Alderman Levin,
Aye.
Alderman Healy,
Aye.
Alderman Honquist,
No.
Alderman Kennedy,
No.
Alderman Mulliner,
No.
Alderman Wagner,
Aye.
Alderman Gutenkopf,
No.
Alderman Deuter,
No.
Alderman Dunn,
Aye.
Alderman Leader,
Aye.
Alderman Palumski,
Aye.
Alderman Graham.
No.
It's tied. Nope.
Nope.
8 ayes and 6 nays.
8-6, that's what I got. 8 ayes, 6 nays, that motion carries. I'd ask city staff to make the requested change to the budget. Any other comments or questions? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to increase the Elmhurst Historical Museum's budget by $40,000.
Alderman Gutenkopf, can you give us a page and a line item?
Nope. I'm going to need city staff assistance for that.
Ms. Gaston, can you help us out? Before I officially recognize the motion, let's get the page and the line item and what number we're increasing to what number.
It's page 160.
Page 160.
I'd like to add it to line 6044.
6044, okay. Give me a second. Page 160, 6044. So, if I may, Alderman Gutenkopf, we have a motion to increase line item 6044 exhibitions on page 160 from 15,000 to
55.
55,000. Does that correctly reflect your motion?
It does, thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We do have a second. Alderman Brame. Discussion. Alderman Gutenkopf, I think you made your case before, but if you want to add to it?
I think that increasing the Historical Museum's exhibit budget is, in this small amount, brings us closer to where it used to be, gives the museum staff an opportunity to create even more incredible in-house exhibits, to bring even more people into Elmhurst, driving visitation, increasing visitor tourism, expanding arts and culture in our community, and enticing people to town to buy and shop and do all those wonderful things. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Okay. Any additional comments? Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Over the years, I've been seen as a antagonist of the museum, and I think lately more of a protagonist. I respect the desire to increase the budget. When we did cut that $100,000 from the budget, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say that the budget at that point was cut to approximately $750,000. It was roughly $850. We cut it down to roughly $750. In 2011, 2012, the actual expenditures were $740,000. In 2012, 2013, which is the last full year budget, expenditures was $745,000. The partial 8-month budget that we're about to end, it's estimated at $788,000. The 2014 projection for the museum is $1,045,561. And the 2015 projected budget is $928,440. Now, some of that is because of grants and whatnot, but the bottom line is we're still spending in excess of $1 million, or projecting to spend more than $1 million there next year. And that's after, again, if my memory serves, we cut it to $750. I think every department in the city would say we could use $40,000 more dollars. I don't see the need in this case. I will not support the motion.
Alderman Wagner.
I'd just like to concur. We've increased the budget almost $300,000. We're paying for some building improvements in the amount of almost $183,000, excuse me. So I concur. I don't actually see the need. We are already increasing their budgets. Thank you.
Alderman Levin.
Well, just to keep things clear, the 183,000 and the 100,000 are state grants. So it is more money for the museum. I'm not in support of it, but I just want to make sure that the facts are stated correctly. The budget may have gone up in other areas, and it is getting more funding, but I just want to make that point.
Okay. Alderman Polumsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't think of this I didn't consider this before tonight, but I think it's interesting to point out that exhibits are now a source of revenue for the museum. If other communities want to rent our exhibit, or we're bringing in more people, so I think that's something to consider. I'm inclined to support it, as the exhibits themselves are the ones that are drawing in more people. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Alderman Leader.
I was at the museum on Sunday, and I was struck by how good this Carl Sandburg and Elmhurst exhibit really is. I mean, it was original, it was engrossing, it was interactive. It was quite remarkable, and it did occur to me that this is being done. The exhibits part of the budget is only $15,000, as opposed to the total budget, which is $750 plus minus. And I think the problem is really not, certainly, it struck me that Lance Towser, who is completely responsible for this marvelous exhibit, could do wonders if he had more money. But I do think the real problem there is the allocation of the $750. It could be and should be allocated differently so that you have far more money for exhibits. When you think about it, $15,000 for a museum, what is a museum about? I would assume it's about exhibits. And so as much as I love that museum, and as much as I think that it clearly is a strong and positive asset here for Elmhurst, I cannot support this because I think that we should allocate that money differently. More money should be for exhibits, but it should come out of this $750 budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Deuter.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, my concern about this motion is the same as the one I had with the last one, which is without a concrete proposal about how the money would be used, it's not clear to me that we're meeting a specific need. I think sometimes when budgets are cut back, organizations are forced to be really creative and to identify some new sources of funding, and that makes them, stronger overall. So I hate to just approach this with let's get this back up to where it could be. So I won't support it.
Okay. Alderman Gutenkopf.
Well, I'd just like to point out that of the museum's budget, $512,000 goes to salaries and wages. That's not exactly reallocatable. The other building improvements, and then there's $119,000 of interdepartmental charges for IT services that are just allocated across departments based on the amount of equipment they have. It doesn't reflect a specific direct spending amount. So I think it's a fallacy to think that we can just arbitrarily reallocate money, unless, of course, we want to reduce or eliminate some of the consultants that we're paying and reallocate that money elsewhere. That's a possibility.
City Manager Grabowski wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I have one clarification point that Director Gaston just reminded me of, that some of the endowment, the EHMF endowment line item 6039 is used for the exhibits, just to be clear to everyone. It may not be that clear in the budget here, but so it's in addition to the 15.
Okay. Any additional comments or questions? Alderman Polumsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm curious to know if we have an idea of what percentage of that endowment, or any figures of what is used? And
Alderman Plumsky, can you speak into the microphone? Some of us are having trouble.
how much of that endowment is allocated for the exhibits?
For the current year we're in and last year and projected out to 2014, the budget would be 20,000 of the amount. There's a number of things that the foundation supports, but of the amount that they're providing, 20,000 in each of those 3 years was specifically for exhibits.
Okay, so it's at 35,000 for exhibits then? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Alderman York?
Thank you, Your Honor. I certainly value the museum as well. I frequent all the events there that I can possibly get to. I support them personally as well as by being at things. I think it's a great museum. If you look at it since 2012-13 and kind of rearrange all the items, get the capitals out and everything, basically their budget has increased 2.3% when you kind of equalize everything. So I value the museum, but I'm not going to be able to support this. This is different than taking 65% out of a budget that, out of the particular line item that I was talking about. So I can't support this. Thank you.
Alderman Plumsky,
Thank you. I just,
please speak up.
thank you. I just would like to say that with the additional information and knowing that there actually is more funding, I will not support this. However, I think that there's opportunity to discuss at the committee level, how this funding is allocated, and perhaps if there's some additional requests from the museum that we can discuss them. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments before I call for a vote? You sure about that?
Not really.
Alderman Bram?
I agree with most of Alderman Gutenkauf's comments, especially in regards to, I think Alderman Leader made some comments of Lance doing a bang-up job in the role he has, and if we increase the line item of exhibits, imagine on what he can do and how many individuals outside of Elmhurst he can draw. As I stated in the previous motion to amend, though, I have a difficult time approving this this line item when there's other what I would deem safety issues that the full city council did not feel that it was a necessity to approve. I think just like the previous line item, I think we should revisit this in next year to see if there is some reallocation that can be done or some other way we could, continue to improve the exhibits that the museum offers to date.
Okay. Seeing no additional comments, I'll ask Clerk Cyprian to call the roll on the motion to increase line item 6044 on page 160 from 15,000 to 55,000.
Alderman Gutenkauf?
Aye.
Alderman Deuter?
No.
No. It was
Oh,
seconded
I'm
by
sorry,
Alderman Bram.
Alderman Bram? Sorry.
No.
Okay, Hipskin? No. Alderman York?
No.
Alderman Levin?
No.
Alderman Healy?
No.
Alderman Honquist?
No.
Alderman Kennedy?
No.
Alderman Mulliner?
No.
Alderman Wagner?
No.
Alderman Deuter, or, yes? Deuter?
No.
Sorry. Alderman Dunn?
No.
Alderman Leader?
No.
Alderman Plumsky?
No?
1 aye and 13 nays.
1 aye, 13 nays. That motion does not carry. That motion fails. Any other comments, questions before we wrap up the budget? I'll remind the council that with these changes, and Marilyn mentioned that she will have a summarization of all changes and all relevant information. We will be voting on an ordinance to approve our 2014 budget December 16th. Any other comments or questions? Alderman York.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to reiterate, a bunch of council members have stated it, but I'd like to thank city staff for the preparation of this budget. I know it was a lot of work on top of a lot of work not all that long ago. I think it's a good budget document. I think it's well thought out. I appreciate all the committee's work in advising and getting staff to where we got to today. And actually, I'm proud of this document, and thank you everybody for their hard work. Thank you.
Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I would like to reiterate not only my gratitude and thanks to the Finance Department for all their hard work. This is the culmination of what was put in motion about 18 months ago or so. I also want to thank the council for their indulgence and all of their hard work during this time. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Alderman.
Mr. Mayor, may
Yes,
I
sir.
have some other business?
Absolutely.
I'd just like to pass on thanks to the Public Works guys. There were 6 water main breaks this weekend. Wow. There were guys that were out working 16 hours on Thanksgiving. Same group of guys was back out till 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night dealing with another 3. So I personally saw them out there, said thank you, and if guys see workers out there in the middle of the night taking time away from their family, please say thanks to them. So
Very good.
pass that on. Thank you very much.
Certainly will.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Alderman York, second by Alderman Hipskin. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.